Well, over the past several weeks, you've learned about some gardening down under in conjunction with my recent study exchange to Australia. And during my visit, it seemed that one particular vegetable was used often in the meals, which Australians referred to as tucker or tea. Now, the vegetable was pumpkin. We had it in soup, scones or scones, baked, fried, steamed, in just about any way that you could imagine. I finally saw the pumpkin primarily used in these dishes, and it's referred to as the Queensland Blue. Now, I took some video of it to show you, and you'll see it sitting on the table among some tropical fruit called Monstera delicioso and bananas. You can see that it looks like a pumpkin with a bluish gray skin, but the meat of it was your typical pumpkin color and texture. Well, we couldn't have a special series about Australia gardening and not offer some of these tasty recipes. So I asked Barbara Brown, our Extension Food Specialist, to help me out with some Australian delicacies using pumpkin.
Cooking with Australian recipes is a lot of fun. Steve brought several back, and I found that most of the ingredients are standard things that we find here in the United States. A little bit different on some varieties, and there are a few things that are different. But the terminology is not always the same. The measurements are often in metric, so there's some translation there as to what's the temperature of your oven supposed to be, how much is in a cup, in a measuring cup, and those kinds of things. And also some of the ingredients are described differently than we do in the United States. For instance, in our pumpkin tomato soup that we've got started here, the recipe called for 2 rashers of bacon. Well, normally I would have thought you just go to the grocery store and get standard bacon, but this is not a standard recipe, and the bacon in Australia is more like a Canadian bacon. It's much leaner than we use in the United States, so that you wouldn't want to just use regular bacon or your recipe would be too high in fat. So I've substituted actually a very lean ham because the Canadian bacon was a little bit more expensive, so we're trying to keep costs down as well. Now, the recipes in Australia often are higher in fat than a lot of us would like to have here if we're going to use them for every day. So we've been trying to do some changes with that as well. They eat a lot of meat, and while the meat itself is often leaner, very often they will add fat to it when it's cooked or after it's cooked. So we've been trying to make some adjustments to fit the American diet and the American lifestyle as well, so that we substituted the ham. We've also tried to incorporate some rather standard American ingredients to this too. Now, I've added to this, we had 3/4 of a cup of chopped green pepper, 1/4 of a cup of chopped green onions, and we're going to add to that another 1/4 of a cup of minced parsley. All of these ingredients would be coming out of your garden now or soon, so that you'd be able to use some of the things that you're producing here in Oklahoma. Now, this also called for 2 tablespoons of butter or margarine in the pan to saute these. I cut that back to 1 tablespoon. You may want to substitute a little bit of vegetable stock in there and put a lid on it and let it actually steam. This will cook for about 5 minutes normally, or until the vegetables are a little bit tender. We're going to speed that up a little bit this afternoon or this morning. And to that, we're going to add a can of Italian-style tomatoes that have been chopped up with the liquid still left on, and also the pumpkin. Now, this is a recipe that's got a little bit more ingredients than the standard pumpkin soup that may be more common in Australia. A lot of those recipes start with the regular fresh pumpkin, the variety that they have there, but that's not always available this time of year. It's difficult to find a fresh pumpkin. If you have other kinds of winter squash, those could be substituted, but again, in the middle of summer, that's hard to come by. So I looked for a recipe that used a canned pumpkin. We used a commercially canned here, but if you have your own at home, you could just add 2 cups of canned pumpkin to this. After you get the pumpkin stirred in, you can go ahead and add salt if you choose. Now, if you canned your tomatoes and your pumpkin with salt already in them, you may not want to do it. Fresh tomatoes, you may want to go ahead and add some, or you may just prefer a little bit to the flavor, but the salt is optional. We added 1/4 of a teaspoon of pepper. Now, this soup can be really perked up. You can increase the amount of pepper, or you can replace the pepper or add some hot sauce to it if you like something a little bit more spicy. Now, also to this, we're going to add 2 cups of chicken broth or chicken stock. If you can make your own and defat it, you're probably ahead. It's going to have a little bit better flavor, or you can get the fat-free reduced sodium varieties that are available now. We put 2 cups of that in, stir that together well. We'll put a lid on this and let it simmer for about 15 minutes and it'll be done. You notice that the soup is very easy to make. It takes very little time. It's got fairly few ingredients, but one thing you do need to remember about this one is that because it's so thick, it's going to splatter on you and around. So you do need to make sure that you cover it during the time that it's simmering for about 15 minutes. This one would also freeze fairly well if you had more than you needed. And with a little bit of sour cream, or in this case light sour cream on the top, and a few more ingredients like some bread, you have a fairly nice meal, particularly in the wintertime when it's a little bit colder and you're more apt to want soup anyway. The bread that we have today is also using pumpkin. These are scones, which are very similar to what we would call a biscuit. However, because they have egg in them, they're a little bit different in the texture and so on. One of the other ingredients that Australians really enjoy and that they're actually famous for is Vegemite. And this is used in some cases the way we would use peanut butter. The kids are raised on it and they really love it, and most Americans tend to turn up their nose at it because it looks a little bit like chocolate, but when you smell it, it smells more like a really concentrated bouillon, so that it's not always what we would expect it to be, but it's good to know what it is, and it's good to have a different culture experience. I hope you'll try some of these our Australian foods. They're fun. It's good to learn about another culture while you're doing it, to talk about some of the other things, particularly if you have kids, to bring them in with the rest of it as you begin to prepare some of the foods. Foods are the center of most cultures. For Oklahoma Gardening, this is Barbara Brown.